main slate. It's the Osmo.com final hour show. Myself, Chris Randone, and the wonderful, talented Sal Vitri. What's going on, man? Happy Saturday.
What's going on, man? Yeah, happy Saturday. Take two here. I'm excited, though. But, yeah, it's a slate where we have a ton of soft pricing just to open, and it got even softer with injuries. I mean, AB being cut, lots of things going on, and I think it's probably, in covering just DFS for like 2 years now, the craziest slate for NFL that I've seen.
Yeah, a lot of cheap prices, a lot of value plays. Kind of reminds you of the preseason because there will be some preseason guys that maybe people targeted that will be in play this week. And before we start diving into this and go into the main slate, our sponsor, Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports, get up to $30 in Yahoo Sports Rewards points simply by signing up through us at Osmo.com. It's that simple. All you got to do is just head over to Osmo.com. Click on some of the NFL articles. What you'll do is you'll find the link there in the cornerback wide receiver matchup article, my likes and dislikes article, Lofty's article, any article in the NFL you can click on. The Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports link will be right there. You just use the sign-up code. That's Awesemo, AWESEMO. They have the 500K baller tournament this week, $50,000 to first place. So go on to Yahoo Daily Fantasy Sports. The Osmo.com final hour show. Right, myself, Chris Randone. And the wonderful, talented Sal Vitri. What's going on, man? Happy Saturday. Just got released.
What's going on, man? Yeah, happy Saturday. Take two.
Quarterback position. Probably going to see 3-4 new quarterbacks this week starting. First one is Kyle Allen. Christian McCaffrey. He's the first highest rated projected running back to be owned this week on Osmo projections at 26.6%. Kyle Allen will be the starter. Cam Newton is out. Let's break this down, Sal. Let's talk about Christian McCaffrey's ownership, and also does Kyle Allen have any value this week, whether it's a tournament or a cash game?
Yeah, so I'll start with McCaffrey. I mean, the entire game right now, it's just looking insane in terms of how fast these two teams want to play. The Cardinals are number 2 in pace. Carolina's number 1. So you have a quick game. I actually think McCaffrey's fine even without Cam on the ground. He's sort of independent, and then in the air, for a quarterback, he's going to be a favorable target, low A dots. And then after the catch is really where he makes his money. So I think McCaffrey's fine. The pace is going to make up for any potential stalled drives that you would see extra here. But Cam was also playing hurt. Like in Thursday Night Football, week 2, he looked terrible. Week 1, he actually looked bad, and McCaffrey still had a ceiling game. So I think McCaffrey's fine. Kyle Allen, as of like yesterday, early evening, early afternoon, really, is when I started to try and build some lineups with him. I mean, his minimum price as a quarterback, $4,000. He just lets you do a lot of other things with the lineup. If you want to kind of get away from the cheap chalk wide receivers down there. So I think he's actually in play, probably more so in cash formats. But if you're going to stack this game for GPPs, the only issue I found with getting to Kyle Allen is stacking the game. It kind of leaves you thin and less exposed to a lot of other places if you go to Kyle Allen. So I think he's actually interesting in cash. And I think McCaffrey, yeah, he's coming in as the highest projected player right now at the running back position. And I think it's for good reason.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think McCaffrey holds a lot of value this week. I feel like this is a game where they go and rely on their best player in a numerous of snaps where he's going to get a lot of short passes probably from Allen to make it feel comfortable, probably rely heavily on the running game. But it's like you said, it's an up-paced game. I probably also like the other side of this game, which we'll get into later. But I definitely feel like the ownership for McCaffrey is definitely worth noted, and I think he's a must play this week. In all honesty, especially in cash. Then we have Big Ben. He's out this week, and they're going to be playing against San Fran, who is kind of good. I don't know. I don't know what to make right now of this. This seems to kind of have it together right now. I really love what Garoppolo is doing right now, but let's talk about Big Ben being out and talk about his backup. I don't know, Rudolph. I mean, what do you make of this? I mean, can we roster him? Because I want to roster Juju, but I just don't know about this connection yet.
Yeah, so I don't think I'm going to be getting to any Mason Rudolph, especially because you have like Kyle Allen min-priced if you really wanted to get cheaper off the board at quarterback. I think it's fine for Juju, this situation. It's just a matter of like context of the slate. The other wide receivers around him, I have so much more interest in. There's not as much question marks around those guys. So that's why I probably don't get to Juju. But in this game, you have Deontay Johnson, was just named the starter, the rookie out there for the Steelers. They put Moncrief to the bench pretty much, lots of drops, dealing with a dislocated finger. The guy who stands out, though, is definitely James Washington. he's in that same pivot price range to be a pivot off of Nelson Agholor. And I think he has just bigger GPP upside, especially when you take into account that he's second on the slate in air yards per target. And he went to college with Mason Rudolph, if you want to play that narrative. So in this game right now on the Pittsburgh side, James Washington for GPPs, like a pivot off of Agholor, I actually think is a pretty solid play. Outside of that, it's kind of wait and see on a guy like Deontay Johnson, the rookie. He played one game. He was injured in the preseason, but he looked really sharp, and they have a lot of big things to say about him. But yeah, right now it's just James Washington here.
I also I think Vance McDonald is in play. When we saw Mason Rudolph come in, he relied heavily on Vance McDonald. I think he got 7 targets, and out of those 7 targets, he caught all of them and 2 touchdowns in the red zone. So each time they were in the red zone, Rudolph seemed to kind of go to that safety net of a tight end in McDonald. So McDonald's only 4,300 as well. So I feel like we might see an uptake there with target shares going to Vance McDonald as well. Another big injury is Damian Williams, who's out for the Chiefs, running back. But LeSean McCoy, who did not practice the other day, now they're saying that he's fully active. Don't really know right now. I mean, he's listed as questionable, so I guess we'll have to wait till the final report. But LeSean McCoy, is this a play? And also, could we pivot to maybe Darwin Thompson, who could see a majority of the bulk when it comes to the pass catching downs?
Yeah, so like you said, Damian Williams out. LeSean McCoy, they said they're going to be cautious with, and not a play that I want to get to this week. Darwin Thompson definitely should be rostered in all season-long formats, but also not a guy I want to get to. Really, this spot right now is just so good for Patrick Mahomes and the passing game, especially Jimmy Smith has been ruled out for another week here in Baltimore. So I'm going to be focusing on the passing game, especially at what seems to be right now low ownership. I'm just going to avoid this backfield. It doesn't seem like LeSean McCoy is going to be getting a 20-touch week. It seems more so likely that he only sees 10 or even below that.
I agree. I feel like the running game won't exist this week. Baltimore also has the number 1 rated rush defense. So this is going to be an interesting matchup where I think you're going to see just a lot of heavy passing game from the Chiefs side of the ball. Go to Philadelphia. They had a lot of injuries in their Sunday night matchup against the Atlanta Falcons. Probably the most injuries I've seen to kind of star players in a half. We got Alshon Jeffery, who was listed as out the other day. Now they're saying that he's questionable. We've seen Nelson Agholor go up to the highest projected ownership player this week at 33.1% in the latest projections at 3,600 on Draftkings. Let's talk about Nelson Agholor, and then I want to talk about going into the injury of Alshon Jeffery and where does this stand now for J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who I want to talk about too as well.
Yeah, so like this is the spot on the slate to sort of try and unpack, see where you're going to take your stand on it. We have Agholor coming in as the highest owned right now in about a third of people's lineups per the ownership at Awesemo. So I'll start with Agholor. He's clearly the chalk. He had a huge game on Sunday night. Could have been bigger if he catches the pass, but he makes up for it later on. It's a spot where I think throughout the week it's actually gotten worse for him. Like earlier in the week, he looked like a great play, 3,600, definitely in cash, tournament's interest. As the chalk or the ownership came up, he became chalky. And more viable pivots, in my opinion, opened up around him. You have Devin Smith, same price range with Michael Gallup going down. You have James Washington opening up now as the starter. You had Moncrief News being benched. You have Preston Williams, even the rookie wide receiver. We talk about preseason, looked really good in the preseason, had a connection with Josh Rosen, and that's going to be a very pass heavy script. So I get it. Like Agholor is going to play in the slot, which is great. It's a really good matchup against Detroit. They've been shredded in the slot. He'll avoid Darius Slay. I don't think Slay is going to shadow anybody really in this game. So it's a nice spot for him. But at that ownership, it's something that I'm probably not going to get to. I personally play single entry 3-max, so I want to take a stand on it. If I play him in 1 out of 3 lineups, I'm not taking any stand. So I'm probably not going to have any in the formats that I play. And another thing to keep in mind is this reminds me last year of Cortland Sutton, the week that Emmanuel Sanders injured and ruptured his Achilles. You had Cortland Sutton, the role really didn't change. He might have gotten like a 2-target bump in opportunity, but the role that's changing here is for Matt Collins. Deshaun Jackson's already ruled out. You touched on J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. His role would change if Alshon Jeffery gets out. So I'm focused, even on his own team, I like Matt Collins more, who saw 8 targets last week. And for me, is a better overall GPP play as he's going to see a higher ADOT. So yeah, in cash games right now, if indeed Jeffery and Goddard are out, then Nelson Agholor is fine. But if you're going to tell me a third of the field is going to have him, and there are a ton of viable pivots, especially on his team, I'm going to be getting to those guys. Matt Collins, James Washington stands out, and so does guys like Preston Williams, Devin Smith. So cash, he's fine, but the ownership at this point, it's just come up too high. And also, like if Dallas Goedert does play, that hurts on the inside Nelson Agholor in the slot. And then if Alshon Jeffery plays, like right now I have him projected for 7 targets. If one or two of those guys play, I'm going to be dropping it down to 5. And is he really worth 33% ownership at 5 targets, which are probably going to be more so lower ADOT, if anything, out of the slot?
Yeah, I think Zach Ertz, I mean, he leads all tight ends right now in target shares at 23. Yeah. And I know that Carson will rely on him heavily. When it comes to Nelson Agholor, I mean, you had Alshon and you had Deshaun Jackson in the first quarter. And so, I mean, really that passing game, he was really the only one on the field that Wentz has had kind of chemistry with, which made sense for him to really attack him. And obviously Atlanta's DBs were nowhere to be found in the cover. However, though, in this matchup, I feel like, all the focus will be on Agholor, and I feel like there will be other targets to go elsewhere. But if Alshon Jeffery is out, I do like Arcia Whiteside as a pivot from Agholor. And the reason why is because he's a tall, big option. I mean, he's a jump ball specialist. So in the red zone, I could see that target share and having Wentz go to him for especially like those jump balls. But I feel like with the ownership at almost 34% for a wideout where we don't know how much of that is going to go to him. I mean, we can't just use a 1-game sample. It's not like he's the only one to rely on. Zach Ertz is still the main guy. So, yeah. Knowing that Ertz is the main guy, I kind of just don't want to go with the field on 33%. And this is one of those things like last week with Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs, 33, 34%. You have him. It was more than likely that if you faded him, you had a pretty solid week. And I feel like this is going to be one of those situations again when it comes to Agholor, especially if Alshon Jeffery is out. I think we could see that rise to even maybe in the 40s, 40 percentile.
Yeah, I really think the biggest thing to emphasize is that I think the public just overreacts to injuries and looks at who's like that next reliable guy in the offense. And for Ertz, it makes sense because we saw it last week. But I like to tend to look towards just where's the opportunity coming from, who's seeing an actual role change. And right now, it's Matt Collins because D-Jax is ruled out. And it will be, like you said, Arcia Whiteside on the outside. They have a whole week to game plan around these guys, which they didn't have last week. It's not going to be just pepper Nelson Agholor with 15 targets or 12 targets or even 10, in my opinion. So, yeah, I think the ownership right now is wrong on him. And it's not even like he's a high ADOT type of player running out of the slot for big play upside in a GPP.
Another injury, or not an injury, but another guy to kind of brush on real quick. I mean, he's been the face of the NFL news for God knows how long now. Antonio Brown released by the Patriots. Did play 1 game, did score a touchdown. So, I mean, for anyone who rostered him, congratulations. I don't know if you want to say he paid off, but, he did have a few catches and a touchdown. They're playing up against the Jets at home this week. They're heavy favorites. I think the last line was 22.5 from what I saw, which is absolutely insane. We just saw Odell Beckham torch the Jets on Monday Night Football. How do we feel now about this passing game? And does it change again? We saw, a few shares and a touchdown go to Brown. Does anything change now? Does Edelman's stock go up here? Does Gordon's stock go up here? Do we roster anyone here in a 22.5-point line for a team like the Patriots?
Yeah, I think it definitely changes things. It makes both Gordon and Edelman just more attractive to me in terms of where you can put their targets. It gives Edelman a decent bump. I don't know how much of last week we can really take into account when Brady didn't throw all that much, didn't drop back all that much, mid-20s. But we did see Antonio Brown go into the slot on more than half of his snaps, which did hurt Edelman. Again, like as small as a sample as it gets in about 2 or 3 quarters of really just 2 quarters of being competitive at all. So I think it's definitely going to help over the long haul, Edelman and Josh Gordon. And for this week, it gave them a little bit of bumps for me, but I still like other players at the wide receiver position around them. But yeah, I mean, it's a really good matchup against the Jets. Really weak secondary, nothing there that's really going to stop Gordon, nothing there that's really going to stop Edelman. So I do prefer Edelman in the slot just for more targets overall. And we've seen them attack the Jets with Edelman just so many different times over the past 3-4 years. But I'm still favoring other guys at the wide receiver position.
When it comes to projections, Sal and I always go over some of the top projected players from Osmo.com's projections. And for those who don't know, Osmo, the #1 rated fantasy player in the world, constantly updates his projected tournament ownership on a daily basis, even sometimes by the hour. And so before we get into this, don't forget, if you don't have access to Osmo's ownership projections for DraftKings, Fanduel, or Yahoo, use the sign-up code NFL Strategy. Get 50% off your first month of Osmo Plus. All you got to do is just go to osmo.com/join. Check out the new landing pages with videos that describe each package. So before you actually get access, you know what you're getting. Get access to all the tools that are developed and used by the number one ranked player himself in the world, Awesemo. All right, so I'm looking at the updated ownership, just updated it. And we kind of touched on Agholor. He's the number one projected player this week. McCaffrey, number 2. And then it goes down to just a few guys in the 20s. We got Ezekiel Elliott, 8,900, going up against Miami. As we know, horrible. One of the worst teams probably in the history of the NFL. 26.1% projected ownership. Elliott, great cash play, I would say. But tournament, is this someone of value? And could we see ourselves, especially for you, someone who plays 3 single entry max? How do we feel about Ezekiel Elliott this week?
Yeah, I think just standalone in the context of the slate, he's probably the best play on the slate. Now, like at the running back position, it depends on where you're going with your lineup. So like if you want to get to paying up at some wide receivers at tight end, then you might not be able to get to Zeke. But I think if you're just kind of starting with Zeke, it makes a lot of sense. 8,900 through 2 weeks, Miami's just looked putrid. They got worse on defense with no Minka Fitzpatrick. Now in that second, third level for tackling, $8,900 is a fair price point. I'm not worried at all really about that ownership. It honestly should probably be higher. So if you want to get there, totally fine. They've given up 195.5 yards through 2 games per game to the running back position, and I'm not worried at all. This is exactly what it checks the box as a big home favorite, huge home favorite, 3 touchdown. And I'm not worried if this guy gets pulled in the fourth quarter because he probably has like 100 yards and 2 touchdowns by that point, or at least a really good game. So Zeke's ownership, nothing about it stands out as being wrong. If anything, probably a little bit too low. And a lot of that's just happening because you're seeing a lot of different running backs garner a lot of ownership, which honestly, depending on where you end up at, it probably benefits you that they're not getting more. So they're all kind of pulling from each other, which is, I think, beneficial just kind of to everybody at that point because nobody's getting too much ownership.
Another running back right below him, 7,200, Austin Ekeler, 22.8% projected right now, going up against Houston. They have a good front four. Let's talk about this matchup real quick. And is this making sense for Austin Ekeler? Or do you see value elsewhere at his price point?
Yeah, I think there's other value at the price point, but I think it also makes sense. The guy's flooring so since Melvin Gordon has been out 5 games now, dating back to last year, Eckler's seen before last week 17.5 touches per game. It was 17 or 18 in those first 4. He saw 23 last week. He just continues to see a really stable pass catching floor. Had a second touchdown called back. He's too cheap, in my opinion, at 7,200, probably by about $600-700. So I think he's fine, especially in a PPR format where I think his floor is honestly like 4 receptions. And we haven't really seen a ceiling game out of him, in my opinion, in the receiving game, like a double-digit target game. This is an offense that wants to funnel to Keenan Allen and Ekeler. Their line has looked better than I would say expected. Coming in, probably expected to be like the worst line in the league or bottom 3. It's looked better than that, but it's still bad. So they're going to just get quick plays out to Ekeler. They're going to get quick plays out to Keenan Allen. I think he's fine at this price point. I do think there are other running backs around that range that in their specific area are interesting in terms of like being pivots. One name that pops out, at least to me, is David Johnson, but he's also garnering ownership, not as much as Ekeler, about half. So that's an interesting pivot option. But right now, I'm not too concerned about the ownership that's going to Ekeler in terms of like getting away from him.
One guy that seems to just look really good this season and healthy, which I think is the biggest thing for him, is Dalvin Cook. And he's the last guy that's above 20% right now in the projected ownership. 7,800, a little bit more expensive than Ekeler, but going to be at home facing an Oakland team. 21% ownership. I kind of like this matchup. I feel like he is the rock of the offense now. And his speed just looks absolutely incredible. So he looks faster. How do we feel here about Dalvin Cook? And is he someone that we can rely on and go to? I feel like he's the safe type of play from a week-to-week basis right now.
Yeah, I think his price point is going to continue to come up. I actually like Dalvin Cook quite a bit this week. That team wants to just run the ball. There are concerns, though, especially if you're somebody who's like just getting to different running backs because there's so many in favorable spots, especially primarily on the top end in pricing. The only main concerns I would have is that through 2 weeks, Oakland's run defense has actually looked pretty stout. And through 2 weeks, teams know that Kirk Cousins is a game manager and that they have to key in on Dalvin Cook. And he's faced about 30% 8-man boxes so far through 2 weeks, which is a lot. Relative, that's top 10 in the league right now, top 5 actually. So not great from that perspective. Now he's looked just dynamite. He's getting involved in the receiving game, and the price point is the thing that for me, as a big favorite on the ground, it's good. He's going to have all the red zone work. Alexander Madison is going to get some touches, but 20% of the workload at most. So I think at that price point, it's fine. I'm going to be getting to him. As of right now, I am getting to him in 3 maxes, but it's something that I want to analyze a little bit and kind of look back at how Oakland's D did, especially their front 4 and front 7 did perform, because through 2 weeks, it's looked pretty stout from the numbers that I'm seeing. But yeah, Dalvin Cook, he's probably $700 too cheap this week.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like based on the first 2 games and what we game flow and kind of the game plan, they want to run, and they want to run a lot. And the offensive line has opened up tremendous holes for Dalvin Cook to where he's getting big plays. And as we know, big plays are huge in fantasy. So definitely feel like Cook should be more owned than what he is. So I do like the Cook call as well. One more interesting thing I want to touch on for ownership, because typically you don't see this high, is a defense. 19.1%. Seems people are jumping on the wagon from last week of the Patriots D and what they did to Miami, scoring a ridiculous amount of points. They're going to be facing another offense now and a third string quarterback. How do we feel here about 3,800 for the Patriots? Actually, than the Cowboys, who, in my opinion, seem to have a better matchup. And I kind of like that pivot of paying up a little bit more for the Cowboys if people aren't going to be on them as compared to what we're seeing here with the Patriots. How do we feel about that?
Yeah, that's like the first thing that I noticed outside of like Agholor and the ownership when I first looked at it. I guess it makes sense, right? Luke Falk, and just not even in the player pool. That's how much of a guy who just signed off the practice squad, not expecting much out of him. So I just don't agree with defense being that highly owned, because it's such a variant position. And like you said, Dallas is in a similar spot for not that much more expensive if you really wanted to get to a favorable spot for defense. So obviously, without a doubt, they're in a fine spot. I think if anything, you do want to get to a defense like that, more so in tournaments, to kind of try and limit the amount of variance there, because it's almost like a lottery playing the bottom end defenses. So I'm a little bit torn. I think 20% or right around there's too much for a defense. If it was somewhere like in the low teens, I'd be fine with it. So yeah, for me, a defense that is so variant, a position that is so variant, trying to pay up when it's chalky just doesn't make much sense. You look at people kind of reacting to New England did last week against Miami and having a ceiling game. But week 1, Baltimore's defense only had 11 points against Miami. And it's just like a thing that's going to go back and forth. I think people are expecting that ceiling game out of New England this week. It's probably more favorable than most weeks. But I'm just not going to be paying for it, because they can very easily get 8 fantasy points because it's such a variant position. It just relies on pick sixes. And you can project how good a defensive line is at getting to the quarterback, which will increase interceptions. But you can't project the guy running it back 70 yards and breaking tackles. So it's just a spot where I'm not going to eat the chalk, especially when paying up.
Yeah, sometimes people like to play that narrative. Well, they did it once, so they're going to do it again. But, typically, as we know in fantasy, that's not the way things work. You have to be a little bit more realistic. All right, so we're going to go into the slate now as far as a game-by-game basis. We're going to talk about the first game here. Bengals at Bills. Buffalo's a 6-point favorite, 43.5 over-under, Sal. There is some injuries in this game. We don't know, at the running back position. This is interesting because I kind of like Frank Gore. I mean, Singletary was in the first 2 games, and Frank Gore's already got 30 carries through 2 games. Bengals are not great against the run. We saw a running back by committee last week just torch the Bengals with the 49ers. Mostard crushed them. You also had Breida just run right by them as well. Let's talk about this game. Let's talk about the wide receivers. Josh Allen, fantasy stud. I mean, since his injury, he's probably been one of the best fantasy quarterbacks. I mean, last week he hit value, and that was in the first half. I mean, had he did something in the second half, he would have, out exceeded every other quarterback. So let's break this down, Sal, and let's talk about your plays and see what you like here.
Yeah, I'll start in Cincy because there's not as much. John Ross, he's just benefited from a lot of fluky plays so far, and I don't think that happens against his own defense in Buffalo that wants to prevent that, so I won't be getting there. No interest in the backfield with Joe Mixon. Michael Jordan, their tackle, is going to miss this game. It's looked bad overall. There's sort of a split going on with Gio, so no interest in Mixon. Tyler Boyd's the only thing that stands out. Right now, he's 8th in the league in targets, 2nd in receptions, and he was in the slot on 2/3 of his routes run as opposed to 45% week 1. And it's his own defense, so he'll be targeted more on the underneath routes, and that'll be beneficial in the red zone. So that's really it. Tyler Boyd, some interest, nothing of a priority. Buffalo side, Josh Allen, still too cheap in a fantastic spot. They had designed runs for him last week, especially around the red zone. He ran behind Frank Gore for his touchdown. So that's good to see. Lots of more upside there for him. It's just a nice spot overall. He gets the second worst overall defense, second worst only to the Giants in both pressure rate, second worst in pass coverage. And then, if you're playing Josh Allen in tournaments, you should probably have John Brown. The thing I'll say about John Brown, he's not just, or at least Buffalo's not just using him as this burner that we just think runs go routes. Like last week, 3 of his receptions were within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage, and 6 of the 7 were within 15 yards. So he's not just running straight down the field. He has that upside, but now there's sort of this floor and consistency to it that I've seen through the first 2 weeks, which makes him like a legit receiver week in and week out, especially for cash even. So I have interest in Josh Allen and John Brown stacks. I usually get to one of them a week in 3 maxes or 20 maxes. And then, Frank Gore, you mentioned it. He's too cheap. Like, he checks all the boxes as a running back that is probably going to see 18 plus touches. He's going to be a favorite at home, all the goal line work. And Cincinnati is 29th out of 32 teams in rush defense this year, and they were bottom 5 last year. So the only issue there is if they give more work to TJ Yeldon backing up. But Frank Gore, we saw them feed him last week for like 20 touches. So I think at his price point, he's actually in play. He's just going to be probably really touchdown dependent, but they should be in the red zone often.
How do we feel about the other side of the ball, specifically John Ross? If he doesn't score that big bomb touchdown with 30, 40 seconds last week, he doesn't really pay off as far as his production. However, though, I don't know what's going on right now. Sal, things are just not working out for us this morning. They won't. People.
It's crazy. No,
guys.
Yeah, we're told we're up now, so that's good. Thank you for those that stuck through it. The blackout.
Yes. Sorry about that. We're going to keep this train moving, okay? So we were just on the Bills and Bengals. We just talked about the Bills side. Wanted you to kind of just harp in on the Bengals side for a second and talk about John Ross, who's been kind of a fantasy stud these first 2 weeks. And, talk about this matchup against the Bills pass defense that is somewhat solid.
Yeah, so like John Ross, wide receiver 1 right now in fantasy, leads the league in receiving, but a lot of it's fluky. I do think, though, there is some stuff or at least some stability to it in this new offense. Like the way that they want to utilize him is at least opening him up to a lot of bigger plays than he was in the past. So I'm not interested in him this week because, the Bills defense are going to play a heavy zone, which really limits those big play upside. The only thing I have interest in here from Cincinnati is Tyler Boyd. He's kind of a zone beater and just a slot wide receiver, played 66% of the snaps in the slot last week. It's going to open up his overall target share. We saw it happen last week with double-digit targets and receptions. So I think it's going to be a good week for Tyler Boyd. Again, it's just a really tough spot to try and get to him in tournaments, just due to all the other guys around him that are just too softly priced for like $400 or $500 more.
Yeah, I feel like it's a different kind of scenario compared to last week where his price point on Fanduel definitely increased and it was kind of tougher to get to. So he wasn't considered necessarily a value play. But on DraftKings, he was still soft. So now things have kind of changed a little bit. So you're not going to see probably as much ownership. Plus the matchup isn't that nice. And I really see kind of the Bills kind of in a better situation in this matchup when it comes to a fantasy perspective. Next game should be a ridiculous blowout. 23-point favorites. These lines are getting wild against the Dolphins. Cowboys, Dolphins, 47 over-under. We talked about Ezekiel Elliott be one of the highest projected fantasy players owned. In a matchup like this with the line so large, can we go to the Dallas offense here and roster some people?
Yeah, without a doubt. I think this is a really good spot to stack if you wanted to. But even if you don't, there's just so many great spots individually here. I think Dak Prescott is probably the best quarterback on the slate this week. He finished last week 23 of 23. If you're somebody who doesn't mind paying that price tag for him, which isn't a ridiculous tag, it's probably too cheap, if anything. I think he's fine. He's second in the league, only behind Lamar Jackson in fantasy points per dropback. Kellen Moore, he has him using his legs again. We see 81 rushing yards through 2 weeks. That's really good. If you're getting 4 points on the ground from a guy, it's an extra touchdown pass. That's an extra 100 yards passing. So I think that Dak's in a great spot this week. You can get to him just, if you want to, you can get to him naked just due to the rushing upside. I'd probably be stacking him with somebody. Amari's fine. Like the matchup against Xavier Howard is going to be difficult, but it's still not something I'm worried about. You're going to see like a 3-target uptick here for Amari with no Michael Gallup. On the season, Amari at 23% target share. I imagine that goes up this weekend. Devin Smith, we talked about as a pivot away from Agholor. I think Devin Smith just has more upside. He's going to have a higher ADOT. He showed it off a little bit last week. A guy who's battled back from multiple ACL tears. He's too cheap, and he's going to be playing a heck of a lot of amount of the snaps. Randall Cobb's not a guy that I want to get to in the slot. I guess if you want to do team stacks, or you can get there, but his role is not changing in this offense. It's going to be Devin Smith's, that is, so that's where I go with the injury to Gallup. So, I think that those are like the passing game options. And then we talked about Zeke earlier, just an absolute smash spot. Cowboys offensive line right now is only allowing an 11% stuff percentage. So 1 out of every 10 plays is getting stuffed. That's one of the best in the league. This guy's going to have running lanes. He's going to have opportunities in the red zone the whole entire game, it seems. So everything on the offense is in play here for me, except for like a tight end. And I'm not really going to get to the slot. So both outside receivers and Zeke. Dak, probably the best quarterback on the slate this week.
Devin Smith, 3,400, bare minimum basically. However, projected 8% ownership. So great value. Definitely going to have an involvement in the offense. And at only 8%, doesn't seem necessarily too bad of a situation when it comes to still getting the bang for your buck and not the field not being on him. So love the Devin Smith call. Going to a next game that has some fantasy options that act. Broncos at Packers. Green Bay, 7.5-point favorites. 43 over doesn't get you necessarily excited about a shootout. But I love Emmanuel Sanders here. He is the leader in red zone targets right now. Joe Flacco has his guy. It's clear as day. He's pretty softly priced, in my opinion. And I feel as if this is a game where the Packers start to go up, the Broncos necessarily aren't running the ball like they did last year with Lindsey. It kind of seems like him and Royce Freeman they're getting shares, but this team seems to be more of a passing team. So talk to us about Emmanuel Sanders. Is this a good play in your opinion? And where are you at on the Packers side of the ball?
Yeah, so Denver, Emmanuel Sanders is the only thing that really stands out. I think it's a good play, and I think there's one contingency to it, and I don't think we're going to know until the game starts, which is a little bit scary. It depends on if Jair Alexander is going to follow Emmanuel Sanders, which they have corner. That's not great for Sanders. So Sanders last week went into the slot on 33% of his routes. That's where he caught the touchdown. That's where he caught the 2-point conversion to take the lead with 30 seconds left. Like you said, he has 7 red zone targets. That's 2 higher than the next closest wide receiver. And if he gets motioned into the slot against Green Bay and Jair Alexander doesn't shadow him, he's going to get Tramon Williams, who was toasted by Allen Robinson left and right week 1, got toasted by Chad Beebe for a 61-yard catch and run last week. I mean, he's just old. Tramon Williams, 36-year-old, oldest defensive back. So for me, Emmanuel Sanders becomes a very good and intriguing play if Jair doesn't shadow him. But if he does, he goes from good to or okay to good play to okay to potentially bad play. So for right now, I'm trying to see if anything comes out on that. And I really don't know. It's sort of infrequent how they use Jair on number 1 wide receivers. And I would say that Sanders is somebody they would profile as that just based on the target share he's getting from Joe Flacco through 2 weeks.
When it comes to the Packers side and the running game, Aaron Jones seems to have solidified a legit role in this offense. 36 carries in 2 weeks. I want to talk about this Broncos rushing defense who gave up some to Montgomery, but also got torched by Josh Jacobs in week 1. So how do we feel about Aaron Jones? And I mean, we talked about pivoting potentially from Austin Ekeler. I feel like this is a great pivot in my opinion. You could save a lot, and I feel like you could still get the production that people are looking for in Ekeler out of Jones. What's your take on it?
Yeah, so Aaron Jones at his price tag is probably the best play in terms of like low-priced running backs or mid-range really in that range. Like Marlon Mack, I had a lot of interest in, but this calf injury, ankle injury, whatever it is, it's a little bit scary for me. So Aaron Jones right now in a positive game script in terms of going to be a home favorite here. He out-touched Jamal Williams. They're talking about potential even snap count. It's already doing that. Like Jamal Williams saw 47% of the snaps last week. Something that's probably going unnoticed. They used Aaron Jones as a receiver. They put him in the slot a couple times in a decent amount of the time last week for about 4 or 5 reps. So I like seeing that. He had 6 targets, caught 4 balls, career high overall touches. Yeah, this is just another spot where like Matt LaFleur, when you looked at him in Tennessee, he wanted to run the ball. Like he started to realize that later in the year that he had talented backs and wanted to run. It seems like although the game script last week getting up 21-0 is definitely skewing some of the results, having a career high touches for Aaron Jones. Just in this matchup under this coach, it seems like they want to become a lot more balanced. Matt LaFleur stressed that after the win last week that they don't want Rodgers throwing even 35 plus times a game. So keeping Rodgers around 30 attempts means that you're probably going to have Aaron Jones touching that 20 attempt mark a lot more this season. And yeah, the matchup on the ground right now, Denver's top 10 in rush defense per Pro Football Focus. But at his price point, I think he's my favorite play at the running back position for GPPs.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like that the price point is just too hard to pass up in this situation for Aaron Jones. And I feel like he's someone that you can rely on when it comes to getting the production that you're looking for at that price point. Another game, Falcons and Colts, which seems to be more of a potential offensive production game. 47 over under, close spread of 1.5 favorite for the Colts. A lot of offensive weapons here on both sides of the ball. I would love for you to break down Marlon Mack, who has 45 carries in 2 games. And then also the passing offense of the Falcons, Calvin Ridley, who looked incredible on Sunday night against the Eagles.
Yeah, I'll start on the Atlanta side. Just lots of weapons here that are underpriced. You talked about Ridley. Julio Jones is the cheapest he's been in quite some time. Saw on Twitter per Adam Levitan that he's like 5 years. This is his price low at 7,300. The thing is, though, this Colts team plays like a very heavy zone. They're similar to Buffalo. So like limiting big plays and Julio Jones big plays is something that they want to do, Calvin Ridley. So I think the price points are going to intrigue a lot of people. They should, because Julio has clear upside. So does Ridley at his price point. But I do like other guys on the slate around them. But if you want to get to them, I'm not going to say it's a terrible option. My favorite play on Atlanta this week is actually Austin Hooper. So right now, Austin Hooper is going to benefit from Darius Leonard. He's out. He's in the concussion protocol for the Colts this week, a linebacker that would have been his probably biggest task and biggest issue. We see Austin Hooper coming in right now through 2 weeks with 15 targets, which is very good for a tight end, and his reliability at his price point is probably around 6 targets with a ceiling in the double digits range. Has yet to get active in the red zone, which is definitely coming. If you just look at a 16-week sample, he's going to have touchdowns. He's right now he ranks 3rd in receptions with 13 and 8th in yards. So at his price point, like if you're not paying up for an Ertz or even a Kelsey, I really like Austin Hooper. He's my favorite play from the Atlanta side here. Devonta Freeman's not somebody I have any interest in, even with Darius Leonard, the linebacker, out. Freeman right now comes in terms of DR as the worst running back in his situations. If you put an average running back in those situations, they pick up 44 more yards at least than Devonta Freeman has. So he doesn't look great right now. Indianapolis side, right now, we talked about Darius Leonard being out, the linebacker. That's huge for, like I said, Austin Hooper. It would have been huge for Freeman if I had any interest. But Marlon Mack's the main piece here. 45 rush attempts. They're using him a ton. He's only facing an 8-man box on less than 7% of his carries so far. He's a home favorite and he's cheap. The only issue is this injury. Like, if we get more news come Sunday that he's going to be 100% healthy, well, then I'm going to have a lot of interest in him in this matchup at that price point. But it's an injury that for a running back, like a calf injury, an ankle lower, just a leg, foot injury, it's something that's scary and could really limit him to like maybe 50, 60 snaps. And then you're going to be playing a lot of him and it's just going to totally burn you. So I want to see more of what we're seeing out of his overall like health status come Sunday. If we get any more news, that'll change my opinion. But right now I'm kind of wearing a little bit in terms of my interest.
Moving along to the highest over-under of the week, 52.5, Ravens at Chiefs. A lot of fantasy fireworks here. Chiefs 5.5-point favorites. Break it down, Sal. Is this the game to stack? Is this the game to attack? How do we feel about this matchup? And is Lamar Jackson going to continue what he's doing?
Yeah, so the Chiefs side, I mean, so here's the thing. People in the chat were saying it. There's concerns around the weather here. We have to just see come game time what the weather looks like in this game. I think weather is something that gets very overrated. If it's some rain, it's not a big issue. They wear gloves, these wide receivers, running backs, even the quarterback. That kind of counteracts that. The wind gust scares a lot of people away. A lot of these stadiums block wind. And number two, if there's wind gusts that are going to be there for a couple hours, it's not going to be nonstop. And the only thing it impacts is the deep ball. So if a wind gust, like unluckily comes through and knocks away a deep ball, well then sure, it'll knock away like 1 or 2 deep balls. It's not something that's making me fade the game. But again, if it's like just torrential downpour for the entire game, it's something that we have to monitor. So we have to wait till Sunday. I usually think weather's overrated when it comes to football. But yeah, the Kansas City side, they're all too cheap in terms of ownership. So you're getting Travis Kelce at a discount, Mahomes at a discount. Sammy Watkins is still almost touching single digits in ownership, which is just ridiculous to me. He's going to be in the slot most of the time. He was there 80% of the time last week. Tavon Young is out for the year, their star slot cornerback. This team got just cooked last week by Christian Kirk and Larry Fitz in the slot. So Baltimore secondary, there's a lot of concerns. They have a safety out. They have Jimmy Ward out, or Jimmy Smith out, and then they have Tavon Young out. So 3 of their better defensive backs are not playing, and now you're facing Patrick Mahomes. So if the weather is indeed fine here, it's a very favorable spot overall to be stacking guys like Sammy Watkins, Hardman, Robinson. I mean, all of them are in play. Travis Kelce. From that side of it, the running back situation, I'm just going to avoid it. Stick to the passing game, in my opinion. The Baltimore side, Mark Andrews is expected to play, dealing with an injury. I mean, he's been the number 1 tight end in fantasy through 2 weeks, second in receptions, 3rd in targets, and right now he is only behind, I believe, Zach Ertz in air yards now after Sunday night's game. So all of this on only 50% of the snaps. So he's just being utilized very heavily when he's out there. He's fine at his price point. Hollywood Brown, I think, is a really interesting play. 40% of the team's target share so far. And if you look at his route tree last week, people are going to expect him, like John Brown, to just be running straight down the field. Last week, he was running curls. He was running slants. He was catching balls 5-6 yards from the line of scrimmage and getting 10 yards after the catch. So he's a legit, in terms of, in my opinion, like a legit wide receiver 1 upside play against this Chiefs secondary that they want to get Jalen Ramsey, but right now they don't have a player anywhere near that caliber in the secondary. So I think Mark Andrews and Hollywood Brown are the guys from Baltimore that makes sense if you want a game stack. I'd rather stack the Mahomes side for a quarterback, and I think Sammy Watkins is the best play in the game overall.
Moving along, we're going to go ahead and move to the 1 o'clock Pacific time games, 4 o'clock on the East. Giants and Bucks, 6-point favorite for the Bucks, 48 over under. I would love for you to talk about the the Giants secondary and maybe the resurgence of the passing game for the Buccaneers. Because I really think here, I love Winston. I love Evans. I love Godwin. Can we touch on the Bucs passing game here this week? Is this something that is a thing as far as a stack?
Yeah, for sure. I think Jameis is right now. He's a top 3 quarterback interest of mine. He's too cheap. People want to anchor on what happened week 1. Some of that wasn't even his fault. Deflected interceptions, the offensive line fumbling the snaps, him getting credited for those. So like overall, he looked bad week 1, but not as bad as it seemed. Week 2 on limited pass attempts, he actually looked good. And now coming into week 3, he has the best matchup through 2 weeks in the entire league. There's nothing in the secondary that can really stop any talented receivers. And you're going to get 2 to 3 talented receivers in Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, and O.J. Howard running down the field. I like the spot a lot. The only concern here is if Bruce Arians goes, oh, you know what? We should probably try and continue to run the ball a ton because Jameis is a liability. I'm not going to weigh that too heavily, at least this week. I think they ran a lot in Thursday night just due to game flow. So I like Jameis. I think stacking him with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is fine if you can afford it. Mike Evans is a really good play for GPPs coming in at lower ownership, and he has the exact same amount of air yards as Chris Godwin through 2 weeks. So it just shows that it's just not breaking his way right now. So yeah, I think stacking here is fine. O.J. Howard's interesting to me at a loaded tight end position. I don't get there unless I'm game stacking.
Texans Chargers 48.5 over under, 3-point favorite for the Chargers. This over under is kind of high, in my opinion. Didn't really expect it. Houston's a very slow paced team. Let's talk about this. I mean, is this over under kind of translating into maybe there's going to be some fantasy production here?
Yeah, I think so. I think this is like the sneaky stack of the week. I think there's multiple spots that aren't getting ownership. And if you team or game stack in general, you'll have low ownership. But this is the one that gives you, I think, in my opinion, just best leverage for what you're getting. People are going to be down on Watson after a week where he had to face Jalen Ramsey and Laramie Tunsil left the game, the offensive lineman that they got from Miami. And it was just Deshaun Watson running for his life. Now, that's probably going to be the whole season, Deshaun Watson running for his life, but Tunsil is expected to play in this one, so that helps. If you want a game stack, I think just getting to Hopkins, Watson, running it back with or even Fuller as well, and then running it back on the other side, you have clear options in Keenan Allen and Ekeler. They're just funneling the ball to those guys. So from the Houston side, I think the best play in the entire game for GPPs, when we take ownership into account, definitely from the Houston side is for me going to be Will Fuller. He's going to be going up against like an undrafted, just second, third string cornerback as their cornerback 2. They have a stud slot cornerback in Desmond King. They have Casey Hayward going to be going up against Hopkins, but then nobody to put on Will Fuller, who's the top play on the slate in terms of air yards per target. So I really like Will Fuller at his price tag. He's just way too cheap. I think he's my favorite play in the overall game when you factor in ownership. And then obviously on the Chargers side, you have Ekeler with the ownership. You have Keenan Allen getting ownership. And there's nothing bad to say about those guys. Allen, number 1 in air yards through 2 weeks. Right now he's second with 25 receptions, and he's just getting the ball funneled to him. Same can be said with Ekeler. So the game stack here makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, if you want to just capture so many high upside players in a game that has a decent total now.
Steelers and 49ers. 49ers, 6.5-point favorites over under 43.5. We talked about earlier, Ben Roethlisberger now out for the season. Rudolph coming in as the QB. Interesting matchup. I mean, I don't really see too much out of this, except I do like Juju. In my opinion, just in some weird scenarios. But outside of that, I mean, is Breida in play? They ran this weird running back by committee last week where 3 guys were running the rock nonstop throughout the game. And Kittle, who was a huge disappointment. I mean, they scored 41 points. Kittle was nowhere to be found in the end zone. I think only got 3 targets in that game against Cincinnati. How do we feel about this game and Kittle's price point now? Is this an area that we can attack?
Yeah, so I'll start on San Fran with Kittle. I think Kittle's price point is fantastic. I think he's the best receiving option in this offense because there's a lot of wide receivers. Like Deebo got free last week, scored a touchdown, the rookie. But so many wide receivers are on the field and they're rotating in and out that the consistency is not going to be there as much as it will with Kittle. Don't look into his routes run that much. He was pulled early last week, so it's going to skew that. The issue is, though, that tight end is so deep, like all across the board. You have cheap guys in Evan Ingram, Mark Andrews, right around, and cheaper than George Kittle. So I'm just not getting to much of him in the lineups that I play because tight end is just loaded with the value and great plays this week, in my opinion, in better spots. Because you did have Pittsburgh. They added Minkah Fitzpatrick in the secondary. They have Joe Hayden getting healthier. So for me, San Francisco is just an overall like fade in my lineups. And then on the Pittsburgh side, I do think Juju is fine in a vacuum. Like I don't think Mason Rudolph hurts his value all that much. In the slot is where you kind of want to target San Francisco. But the opportunity cost of the other receivers in his range, I think, is too high to get to him for me. James Washington would be the pivot, one of like the 2 or 3 pivots I get to, getting away from Nelson Agholor this week. I think he has just more GPP upside, higher risk for sure because he's not running out of the slot like Agholor, but he has just so much more upside. Second on the slate behind Will Fuller in air yards per target, and he's now going to be getting thrown into 3 wide receiver sets ahead of Dante Moncrief.
Let me ask you this. When it comes to the 49ers, you mentioned Deebo Wilson. Can we see a repeat, with what we saw, or is this just a one-time fluke type of thing? Because, I mean, obviously the price point's there. Could we attack that again?
So for Deebo?
Yeah.
I think that Deebo is going to be fine like as the season goes on. It's just not something that I want to chase this week because wide receiver is just so deep overall. So I'm probably not going to get to Deebo this week. Samuel, the rookie, he looks good. Like in season long, I have a lot of him, but I'm not going to get there this week just because they are running such like large rotations. Even with Trent Taylor going down on IR in the slot, they still have so many receivers getting involved in that offense that it's just a consistency thing, especially when you factor in that wide receiver from top to bottom is just all mispriced this week.
Steelers struggled last week defensively, specifically against the tight end. We saw Will Dissly score 2 touchdowns in the red zone, kind of like a relapse of last year where Steelers struggled against the tight end position. Really love Kittle this week, really love his price point. So if you're looking at certain scenarios where you're looking to pivot from either Ertz or you're looking to find someone who has some fancy value with not much ownership, I think we'll see this week ownership not be there for Kittle strictly because of what we've seen the first 2 games. So definitely love the Kittle call and love that situation. Our last game we go into, Saints and Seahawks. Seattle 5-point favorites, over under 44.5. Drew Brees is out. Changes the passing game completely. I think Michael Thomas is not someone we can go after. I watched that game against the Rams, and Bridgewater just did not look good. So how do we game flow working out for the Saints? And how do we feel about on the Seahawks side, especially with Penny maybe being out and Chris Carson being the man that we've seen the first 2 weeks?
Yeah, that's the big thing. Chris Penny somehow tweaks his hamstring in a walkthrough in practice, I think yesterday. I don't know how that happens, but yeah, he tweaked it. So keep an eye on that because right now Chris Carson, if he's out, that's like 30% of the snaps that are going to go back to Carson and Procise. You're going to probably get Carson playing 80% of the snaps. So it becomes a much better play at that below $6,000 price tag. I'd have a lot of interest if Penny is out. So keep an eye on that. Sticking with Seattle, Tyler Lockett, I think his ownership right now is criminal at 3% or bottom sub 5%. It's just ridiculous. If you play Tyler Lockett this week, he's going to be in the slot. He's going to be the main target of this offense. And the exact spot that you want to target against New Orleans is in the slot. So I think Tyler Lockett is somebody that if you play a lot of lineups, you can easily double the field on, and it's something that I would recommend doing. So Seattle, those are the main options. Is if you get Penny out, Chris Carson and Tyler Lockett. Don't have too much interest in DK this week. Overall, Metcalf looks fantastic. He's 3rd in the entire league based on his air yard share per his team at 53%. But all the guy's doing is running straight down the field, which is good for fantasy, high upside plays. But he has a legit cornerback on him this week, so I'm just not going to get there with so many other wide receivers, especially on his own team. On the New Orleans side, yeah, you mentioned it. They're potentially going to be playing through 2 quarterbacks, like pivoting in and out is what I was reading. Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill. So just to create deception, which for them they should be doing, like try and win some games while Drew Brees is out, do whatever it takes. But for fantasy, that's just disgusting. So Kamara, Thomas, there's too many question marks around them at their price tags for me to get there this week at least. So I don't really have any interest in the New Orleans side of the ball. I will mention, though, that Traquan Smith was ruled out. Keith Kirkwood was placed on IR. So they're really thin at wide receiver. So I imagine just the target share is going to be extremely narrow between Kamara, Thomas, and probably even more looks for Jared Cook.
Yeah, also, I think be on the lookout for Austin Carr. I think he might serve as the number 3 wide receiver. And I say this because in practice, Austin Carr would probably have the most reps with Bridgewater, since preseason and throughout the week. So there could be a connection there that we don't know of. So that'd be interesting to look out as we saw for the Seahawks secondary. They have given up big plays this year so far, and they've had some offenses that have exploited their coverages. So I agree and look on the outlook for that, especially if Seahawks go up big. Bridgewater is going to be in passing situations only. Don't know where this stands for Kamara, but if you want to play kind of the reverse narrative against the field, Kamara's really nowhere to be found. So could be interesting upside there as far as from an ownership perspective and an opportunity to see Kamara go off. That's it for this slate. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It was a struggle, but we got through it. We found a way to win. And at Osmo.com, if you don't have any of the tools or resources, you don't have any of the ownership projections, the software, Fantasy Cruncher, any of the premium articles, go to Osmo.com, use the code NFL Strategy, get 50% off your first month, try it out. Osmo has the NFL Top Stacks tool now, gives you the top stacks for the week. Pretty awesome stuff.